Well, what is there to say? Hello and welcome to the race recap for what was an incredible Italian Grand Prix. A really good day for Formula 1 in general. After what had been, other than one race, a fairly and a couple of middling ones, not the most exciting season so far, we then get faced with that race. And we saw a midfield winner, I believe for the first time since Pastor Maldonado in 2012. That was the last time we saw a legit midfield team win a race in Formula 1. And today, Pierre Gasly in the AlphaTauri took his maiden Formula 1 victory. An absolute shock result which no one would have seen coming. Even though Gasly had impressed so far this year, no one thought that it would be possible. Everyone thought that these sorts of results were impossible now. But it's happened. So, let's go in to the race report. So, at the race start, Lewis Hamilton led the way. But Valtteri Bottas really struggled off the line going into the Rettifidio chicane. He got initially jumped by Carlos Sainz at the start, and then Lando Norris managed to elbow his way through at the Della Roggia, managing to get through. And then Bottas ran wide on the exit of the second Lesmo corner, which allowed Perez and Ricciardo through going into Ascari. Was at the back, there was contact between Gasly and Albon. There was no penalty given for that, but Albon got a penalty for something else later on, for an incident with, I believe it was Romain Grosjean. In the early stages, we saw our first retirement, and it was a Ferrari. Sebastian Vettel had a brake failure going into where his brake did actually catch fire, and then he went straight through the boards at the first corner, and he had to retire from the race. But the early laps were fairly formulaic. But we witnessed an Achilles heel with the Mercedes. Whilst Lewis Hamilton was escaping up front, Valtteri Bottas, after dropping back at the start, was struggling to make his way through the field. And that was because, as we have actually seen in the past, the Mercedes does not run well in dirty air. And especially as this track had fairly high temperatures. And he did not get... The lack of clean air meant that his car began to overheat. But then the race turned upside down. Kevin Magnussen came to a stop on pit entry, and they brought out the full safety car and closed the pit lane. And then Lewis Hamilton came in. Apparently he didn't spot the signs telling him not to go in, and neither did the team. And then he went into the pits, and obviously that he fell foul of the stewards. Carlos Sainz took the lead as a result, but he pitted in once the pit lane had opened. But the pit lane closure, that allowed those who'd already pitted, which included Gasly, the two Alfa Romeos, although Giovinazzi did pit under the safety car. Lance Stroll did not pit, but was leading. But Pierre Gasly was put in a very good position at this point. And then, on the restart, Charles Leclerc went heavily into the wall. Thankfully, he was okay. He got out of the car, but the tyre wall was destroyed. And that brought out the red flag. And that turned the race on its head. Have to talk about Ferrari and home embarrassment for them. I mean, this was kind of driver error, but also shows how much of a difficult car that Ferrari is to drive. The fact that he lost it on that both drivers have had quite a few weird spins, and this was one of them that had quite a few big consequences. And there was an interesting moment when the car was being removed from the barrier, and then it kind of actually got dropped to the ground. I'm pretty sure there would have been a lot of jokes saying, why did they protect it from damage so much? Why didn't they let that car get destroyed? There would have been a lot of memes about that. But that turned the race upside down because the red flag was out, and Lewis received a 10-second stop-go penalty. And after a red flag, which actually had a standing restart afterwards. That's the worst, literally the worst possible scenario, because that was going to drop him right to the back of the field. And then that put Lance Stroll, who was able to change his tyres and was in second in a net race lead. But Lance Stroll kind of fluffed the start, dropped behind the Gasly and the two Alfa Romeos, and then squandered it going into the Della Roggia, and could not recover. He dropped behind Sainz and Gasly. I mean, both then managed to clear the Alfa Romeos with ease. But Max Verstappen, bad day for Red Bull. He then came into the pits to retire. Apparently a suspected engine issue, which they did not want to get worse. That's why Verstappen was retired. But as you can, he was having quite a poor race up until that point. The Red Bull just did not seem to have good pace around this circuit. But here you can see Carlos Sainz managing to get past Kimi Raikkonen. Giovinazzi had to pit for a 10-second stop-go penalty as well. And then Lance Stroll made a great move around the outside of the Della Roggia to take the final podium place at that point. And now Sainz had clear air. It was up to him to catch up to Pierre Gasly. And as the McLaren has proven to be a very quick car, many expected Sainz to catch up to the AlphaTauri quite quickly, considering that the McLaren is seen to be quite a lot faster than the AlphaTauri and easily make the move stick. But that did not happen. Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, was fighting his way through the field. And in the end, he did good damage limitation. As you can see, here he is getting past Kimi Raikkonen, who did eventually dropped out of the points. But it was a good drive from Lewis in the end. He managed to get back up to 7th to take, which was probably the best he could have managed, passing Esteban Ocon on the final lap. But on the final lap, Carlos Sainz threw everything at it. He managed to close up to the back of Pierre Gasly, and he threw, as I said, he threw everything at that last lap. But Pierre Gasly managed to soak up the pressure and take his maiden Formula 1 victory. And as I said, it was a great moment for him. How could you not love that moment? How could you not feel happy for him in the end? Because it was a great moment for the AlphaTauri driver. This is not the right result. I need to see if I can get the right one. There's actually a reason I can see why it's not the right result. But it was a great moment for Pierre Gasly and a great moment for Formula 1 as well, to see a midfield team. Been a lot of complaints that sort of thing is not possible nowadays, that for midfield runners to have their moments like that. But so to see Pierre Gasly, I can't imagine do that. I can't imagine remember a more popular winner race victory in recent years. Obviously, Pierre Gasly has become a very popular driver this year after the way that he's dealt with everything that has been thrown at him over the past 18 months. And now he has taken that maiden win. Carlos Sainz finished in second. It was bittersweet for him. He was pleased to get his career best, but he was disappointed not to get the win. Lance Stroll took third place, taking Racing Point's first podium since Baku in 2018. Lando Norris finished in fourth. He believed it could have been better. Valtteri Bottas will be ruining this race, that he was not able to recover from that poor start. Daniel Ricciardo finished in sixth ahead of Lewis Hamilton. His damage limitation was good. Esteban Ocon finished in 8th ahead of Danny Kvyat and Sergio Perez. Williams would have been aching to miss out on the final point in their family's last race. Then it was Grosjean, Raikkonen, Russell, Albon and Giovinazzi, with Verstappen, Leclerc, Magnussen and Vettel as the race retirements. Now I'll be doing the team-by-team review later on, but now it's time to talk about... But before that, let's talk about the Junior Series. Firstly, starting with the Formula 2. The Junior Series also had their fair share of action this morning. At the start of the race, it was Louis Delatraz who had reverse grid pole. But at the start of the race, it was Dan Ticktum who immediately seized the initiative, and he took the lead going into the first corner. And he eventually disappeared off. Here you can see Mick Schumacher and Guan Yu Zhou. Mick Schumacher started progressing his way through the field after starting 8th as a result of the reverse grid from his victory in yesterday's feature race. Mick Schumacher started to progress, passing first Zhou and then passing Lundgaard. But it was bad luck for Yuki Tsunoda, who had a mechanical issue which eventually meant that he could not finish the race. Whilst Guan Yu Zhou then was on the charge, managing to get past Christian Lundgaard, and he had a lot of pace. Here you can see Robert Schwartzman, who had been held up by Luca Giotto, who damaged his front wing in the early stages, defending from Jehan Daruvula. He had eventually escaped from Daruvula. But then, disaster struck Guan Yu Zhou. Mick Schumacher made a mistake at the chicane and dropped behind Zhou and Lundgaard. He actually went off at the first chicane. And then that gave Zhou, and I thought he legit could have won this race. He had a lot of pace, and I think he could have won this race, but then his car conked out on him. And that's the second time his car conked out of him when he was looking promising. Really, he has been the unluckiest driver in Formula 2 this year by quite a long way, has Guan Yu Zhou. Whilst in the battle for second, Callum Aylott managed to get past Louis Delatraz, a crucial move in the championship positions, before Christian Lundgaard eventually managed to get back past in the ART. Whilst the virtual safety car came out as a result of Roy Nissany tapping Felipe Drugovich into a spin. But Mick Schumacher, despite dealing with quite a hefty flat spot, managed to get past Louis Delatraz, and he was almost followed through by his teammate, but Schwartzman did eventually run out of laps. Dan Ticktum did take the victory, but there was late drama as he was disqualified. He parked his car on the slowdown lap, and apparently this was to conserve the fuel sample, but it did turn out that he did indeed fail to provide the FIA with an adequate fuel sample, and that meant that he got disqualified from the race. And that means that it was Callum Aylott who took his third victory of the season in the UNI Virtuosi ahead of Christian Lundgaard. Mick Schumacher finished in third, having another weekend of a double podium. The thing about Mick Schumacher is, yes, he may not have had the pace for the most part of Aylott or Schwartzman, but he has been more consistent than the pair of them, which is why he is in this position right now. Then you had Louis Delatraz. It was a weekend of damage limitation for Robert Schwartzman after his bad qualifying, and he managed to work his way up to 5th over the course of the weekend. Good drive for him, considering his bad qualifying, and considering at Monza it is not easy to progress through the field. Jehan Daruvula finished in 6th ahead of Jack Aitken, and Nikita Mazepin fought his way from the back of the field to get the final point. Juri Vips just misses out on points ahead of Nissany, Matsushita, Alesi, Sato, Samaya. Giotto had to pit after contact, I believe, with Aitken. Then it was Markelov, PK Armstrong will be disappointed with 18th after a promising race yesterday. And the retirements were Drugovich, Tsunoda and Zhou, with Ticktum being disqualified. In the driver's standings, Callum Aylott now leads by 6 points back to Mick Schumacher in second. Robert Schwartzman is in third, 9 points off the lead. Yuki Tsunoda lost a bit of ground this weekend as a result of his shenanigans. Christian Lundgaard is in 5th ahead of Nikita Mazepin in 6th. Guan Yu Zhou drops to 7th. With Louis Delatraz in 8th, and it's Ticktum and Giotto rounding out the top 10. And the action was extremely prominent in Formula 3 this morning. There is something about GP3 or Formula 3 and Monza which always seems to produce a thriller. In Monza, this circuit. And this morning was no exception. It was Roman Bedov, is only his 4th race, who was on reverse grid pole, but he immediately lost the lead. He lost out to Zendelli and Fittipaldi going into the first corner, into the opening corner of the race. Zendelli took the lead, but Fittipaldi was putting Zendelli under a lot of pressure, whilst Teo Porcher made a mistake going into the gravel, which dropped him down the order. But then the battle for the lead, Enzo Fittipaldi took the lead, but then Zendelli immediately struck back. But then there was contact, which resulted in Fittipaldi really bad luck, because I don't really think anyone was at fault for that. But Fittipaldi got a puncture, and that was that as far as his race was concerned. Zendelli then went off and then allowed Piastri through. But then there was drama as Clement Novalak hit the back of Oscar Piastri, and he collected a couple of other cars in the melee, and Piastri, as well as a couple of others, were out of the race. And Logan Sargent was sizing his way through the field as a result after being at the back of the grid. And the safety car helped him. And he then was up to 4th after Zendelli made a mistake. But then he went on the attack on his teammate Frederic Vesti, which then allowed Zendelli to go straight back through. Porcher then got through. And then Vesti made a mistake. He allowed Zendelli and Porcher through and was under attack from Sargent again. But there was contact going into the Ascari chicane, which punctured Sargent and broke Vesti's front wing. Logan Sargent was out of the race, so this was going to be an irrelevant race in terms of the championship fight. And Vesti was also out of the race. Teo Porcher was on the charge, managing to get past Zendelli. He fought his way afterwards early off and was up to 3rd. Smollya then also managed to pass Zendelli, but it was Jake Hughes who capitalised on all the mayhem, and he took the victory. He was initially ahead of Liam Lawson, but Liam Lawson received a post-race penalty. I can't quite remember what it was for. I have to have a look, but he received a penalty for forcing another car off the track. Forcing the Rim Zendelli off the track at the first corner. And he lost. There was so much going on, it's hard to remember everything that happened. But Jake Hughes won. Teo Porcher had a very good weekend, got a double 2nd place. Alexander Smollya rounds out the podium ahead of Rim Zendelli, Alex Peroni in 5th, and Pierre-Louis Chauvet getting some good points in his 2nd weekend in Formula 3. Liam Lawson dropped to 7th as a result of his penalty, ahead of Roman Stanek in 8th, Ollie Caldwell in 9th, with Richard Verschoor rounding out the points. Then it was Fernandez, Flörsch, Belov dropped down to 13th in the end. Then it was Malvestiti, Hauger, Das, Fraga, Williams, Fittipaldi, Nannini, Doohan and Deleda, with Vesti, Sargent, Novalak, Piastri, Schumacher, Beckman and Dunner, as retirement with Bent Viscal, who was originally in the points, disqualified at the end of the race as a result of a technical infringement. In the drivers' standings, Oscar Piastri's 8-point lead is exactly as it was after yesterday's race, going into the final round in Mugello. But Teo Porcher has now moved up into 3rd in the standings, and if any more shenanigans occur with Piastri and Sargent, then the likes of Porcher, Lawson and Beckman could potentially get into this. Vesti is also, but it's an interesting battle for 3rd at the moment nonetheless. Then you have Jake Hughes, Loren Zendelli, Alex Peroni and Richard Verschoor. Interestingly, both contenders have grid penalties going into the next race. Oscar Piastri has a 5-place grid, the bigger penalty. He has a 5-place grid penalty. It was originally going to be a 10-second time penalty, but it was converted to a 5-place grid drop because he did not finish the race. For forcing David Beckman off the track, which allegedly caused Beckman damage that caused him to retire. Whereas Logan Sargent received a penalty for the incident with Vesti, and he received a 3-place grid drop. So it's going to be an interesting finale in Mugello next week. But now, it is time for the team-by-team review of the Italian Grand Prix. And this is going to be a very interesting team-by-team review, with a lot of good days for some, bad days for others. They will be ruining the fact that they did not get that final point in Frank and Claire's last race with the team. But the car apparently lacked straight line speed because it was a fairly draggy car. Another bad day for Haas, although a 12th place from Romain Grosjean is not bad, to be honest. But Kevin Magnussen retiring with a suspected issue. He actually had to pit after contact with Giovinazzi on the first lap, but unable to score a point. Once again, it's been a tough season for Haas. Out of the bottom 3 teams, it will be Alfa and Romeo that are the most disappointed, considering what the position they were in and the fact that Kimi Raikkonen was unable to defend those places. But Kimi Raikkonen eventually dropping down to 13th and Giovinazzi finishing in 16th as a result of his penalty. Weirdly, the victory for Pierre Gasly does not actually change AlphaTauri's constructors' position, although it does move them right up the order, or not right up the order, allow them to close on the likes of Ferrari and Renault. And obviously there's going to be a lot of celebrations at AlphaTauri. Their second win in Formula 1, obviously their first win was in 2008 in Monza with Sebastian Vettel. But an incredible day that will be remembered. The celebrate, it didn't just mean so much to Gasly, but it meant so much to the team as well. The amount that they celebrated the victory. I mean, who would have thought? And also it's given the clothing brand that they rebranded the team as some good promotion as well. But a win for Pierre Gasly, and who would have thought that we'd be saying that? From one Italian team with a good day to one Italian team with a bad day. A double retirement, a home embarrassment, a brake failure on Sebastian Vettel's car while Charles Leclerc hit the wall on the exit of the Parabolica. And this is just turning into an absolute write-off this season is for them. There's not much that can be said. Very bad day for Ferrari. Decent day for Renault, double points, not as good as they were in Belgium, but Ricciardo finishing in 6th, Esteban Ocon finishing in 8th, being passed by Lewis Hamilton on the final lap. So a reasonable day for them on the day that they announced that they're going to be rebranded as Alpine next year. It'll be a shame to lose the black and yellow livery from the grid. Finally, they get the podium, although they are a bit disappointed that it wasn't more. Because Lance Stroll finished in 3rd place, but they actually feel like if it was a normal restart rather than a standing restart, that he had the pace to fend off Gasly and Sainz. So, it's weird that they get a podium with a little bit of disappointment that it wasn't them on the top step of the podium. But They take their first podium since Baku in 2018, and they have reason to be happy with that. Taking their second podium of the season was McLaren, with second place Carlos Sainz coming oh so close to winning the race, but eventually he could not manage. It was a really good drive from Gasly to actually soak up the pressure of Sainz in the end. Good to see that Carlos Sainz did respect Pierre Gasly, but I'm pretty sure whilst they had been happy to get the podium, there would have been this nagging feeling of, we could have won. Of course, it was one of those days for Red Bull. A bad race for Alex Albon, who was actually battling floor damage from the early lap, which obviously compromised his pace. Whereas Max Verstappen, he did not have that much pace. The car just did not seem that good around this circuit, and he retired with a suspected engine issue, which they retired him to prevent the issue getting worse. So, a bad day for Red Bull. It could be seen as a fairly bad day for Mercedes, but they do still extend their lead in the Constructors' standings. Their lead in the Constructors' standings is 123 points. So they still lead the Constructors with a 5th and a 7th, which was reasonable damage limitation, ahead of Red Bull in 2nd. But Lewis did a good job to get back up to 7th. He had some absolutely incredible pace towards the end of that race, but they'll be annoyed not to have won that, especially considering that Lewis looked to have it in the bag before the safety car came out. But in the drivers' standings, Lewis Hamilton, despite his good drive, the gap has actually been brought down to 47 points after Valtteri Bottas finished 2 places higher than him. But Lewis did have the fastest lap, which gave him an extra point. Valtteri Bottas has moved, but the gap is actually bigger than what it was because Bottas is further behind than Verstappen was. Verstappen has now lost 2nd to Bottas and is in 3rd, with Lance Stroll and Lando Norris level for 4th in the standings. Then you have Alex Albon in 6th, Charles Leclerc in 7th, after another race with no points. Then you have Pierre Gasly's win moves him into the top 10 of the standings, with Sainz and Ricciardo rounding out the top 10. But that is it from the Sunday recap. Be sure to join us on Thursday for the midweek recap, where we will review. There's a lot to review from this weekend, where we will also preview the Tuscany Grand Prix in Mugello. First time F1's ever been there, and I think that is going to be an interesting race. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.